Okay, so we're rereading, just for the tape, to say we're rereading Psukim Yadal to the end. So again, Pasuk Tet Zayin, Vayitzu Am Vayaviu Vayasu Lahem Sukkot Ishal Gago V'chatzorotehem V'chatzorot Beit Elokim. So the people went out and they did what they were asked to do, and they built their Sukkot on their house, on their rooftops, in their courtyards, in the courtyard of the Beit HaMikdash, V'Rechov Shar HaMayim, and also in the street by the gate of water, V'Rechov Shar Ephraim, and also in the street near Shar Ephraim. Vayasu Kol HaKahal HaShavim Min HaShavi. All the people who returned from the galut, from the exile, they made Sukkot. They built Sukkot, Vayeshu Sukkot, and they sat in those Sukkot. Ki lo asumi me Yeshua ben Nun, Cain ben Esau, because this had not been done since the days of Yoshua ben Nun. Ad hayomahu, until that very day. But it was extreme joy. They read the book of the Torah every day. We're talking now about every day of the Chag of Sukkot. From the Vayasu Chag Shivat Yamim, every day, like we know we do today. They read from the Torah every day for the 7 days of Chag. And on the last day, which is the 8th day, which is its own Chag, is what we call Shmini Atzeret / Simchat Torah. Okay. These few psukim pose some very interesting questions. But I want to focus on one thing first. The first thing we're going to do is take a look at a piece by the Dat Sofrim, who's going to discuss with us the significance of what is really going on here. Okay, we have questions about the Rosh Hashanah we're going to pose. We have questions about the materials that were told to gather. We have questions about what do you mean they didn't make the Sukkot that since the time of Yoshua. That is absolutely not true. So we're going to get into that. But what was the source of this big simcha? What was really going on here? So you might think, oh, okay, well, they're making Sukkot, and it's the first time they've done it in a while. And it's also the only mitzvah. It's only the only chag that says samachta b'chagech vayita ach sameach. You should be exceedingly joyous. Maybe it's a bit of a stretch. So let's take a look first at the Dat Sofrim and see what he says about this. Make this bigger. Okay. So he talks about first that the people who, it repeats the fact, this is kind of like in the middle of something, I don't want to do the entire thing, that the people who made this were the people who returned from captivity after the Churban Habayit, okay, after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And it's kind of like, it would seem that's a little bit mutar, that's a little bit extraneous, not to, actually, they have to really tell us that. It's not like we don't know who did this. So he continues as follows. HaChurban hagal lo rak be'anashim v'gam ba'aretz. We think in terms of, wow, what did the destruction of Beit HaMikdash do to Am Yisrael? Well, to the Galut, we lost the Beit HaMikdash, we couldn't bring Korbanot, and on and on and on. But what we don't take into consideration is what did it do to the physical land of Israel? It also had it was a pigia, there was an attack, so to speak, against the land of Israel. Because as we know, the land of Israel is not like any other country in the world where it's just a piece of real estate. But also we know that the land itself contains kedusha. The proof, mitzvot hatluyot ba'aretz, that there's certain places you can't walk, like on Har HaBayit. So we know that the land itself has a level of kedusha in many different respects. When the land of Israel was desolate, with no one living here, borrows the term really from Eicha. Parcha kedushata, the kedusha of the land seems to have left temporarily. But at this moment, when Bnei Yisrael made Chag HaSukkot with all the masses of people, the kedusha of the land returned. Now, I don't have it on the screen, but he is quoting that quote, just you should know where it's from, is from a Gemara in Erechim that discusses this. The Dat Acheret, another opinion, there was no need for a renewal of the kedusha of the land of Israel. And our pasuk actually has a hint to something hidden that occurred as a result of this making kedusha. That it's not this moment that really helped bring the kedusha back to the land properly, but rather when we get to chapter 9, which we may get to tonight, and we read the entire parak, almost the entire parak of parak Tet is a tefillah, some of which you are very familiar with because we say it every day in davening. Remember, what did this chapter start with? It started with the words ki ish echad, right? We said that it meant not, had different meanings here, but now he's taking this meaning to be that there was tremendous achdus, or unity among the Jewish people, because also their level of faith and belief in Hashem, the trust in Hashem was at that moment perfect, due to the power of the reading the Torah publicly basukot. What happens? We know that when it says in the Torah that the mitzvah of Sukkot it says, again, gives a reason. That Hashem, that all future generations should know that it was with Sukkot that Hashem moved people, brought them through the Bnei Yisrael out of Egypt and through the desert. And this became like they saw it now, b'chush, they actually witnessed this. And it also lessened the Yetzer Hara for idolatry that constantly was bothering Bnei Yisrael. They knew, the Jews knew, that the non-Jewish world bowed to idols that were not going to help them. But for the Jews at this moment, they realized it was kind of an awakening, that they realized that there was a chance right now to fix themselves, and to have an influence on the entire world, that they would destroy all the idols and idolatry. Now, before I look at this next few lines, I want to take a look at this question. This is the question we're going to deal with for just about 5 minutes. There are many, many opinions about this. You cannot in any way, shape, or form say that this pasuk is meant to be taken literally. Again, it says, Ki lo asu mimei Yoshua binun ken b'nei Yisrael ad hayom hahu. Right? They made Sukkot, they sat in Sukkot, and this was not done since the days of Yoshua. But take a look again, please, at pasuk Yud Zayin, the one I just read, number 17. Let's read it slowly. Vayasu chol hakahal hashavim min hashvi Sukkot. So all the people who had returned from the captivity made Sukkot, vayishu basukot, and they sat in them. What does it say now? Look at the words. Ki lo asu mimei Yoshua binun ken b'nei Yisrael. If it really meant it literally, it would just say Ki lo asu mimei Yoshua b'nei Yisrael, or Ki lo asu mimei Yoshua Sukkot. But it said, what's this king? What's this? They hadn't done this. The word king can mean something more than just yes. So here it seems to indicate they didn't do this. What's the this? So we're going to go backtrack first to this other slide first and see the opinion of the Dat Sofrim, and then a couple other opinions. I think they're all Bag, and I forgot who else. Starting over here, where it says Ki lo asu ken. What is it that they didn't do? Now, how can we say it can't be that it's no way that they didn't have Sukkot before? Because from the time Yoshua bin Nun, we had the first Beit HaMikdash, we had David HaMelech, we had Shlomo HaMelech. We know that they kept Chagim. Not only do we know that they kept Chagim, we also know that the coronation, not the right word, the Chanukat HaBayit of the Beit HaMikdash took place and actually delayed Sukkot. We talked about that in Sefer Melachim years ago. It delayed the holiday of Sukkot. He was able like a Horat Sha'ah. So we know they kept Sukkot, and they sat in Sukkot. So according to multiple opinions, what's going on here? So here's the Dat Sofrim's opinion. What does it mean they didn't do what since the day Yoshua bin Nun? A massive, major action like this had not been done. Lo na'aseh mimei Yoshua. When Bnei Israel come into the land of Israel, what are they faced? Now we know the land has inherent kedusha because Hashem gave us this land. And Abraham lived here, Yitzchak lived here, Yaakov lived here, the Shivtei lived here, and then they went to Galut, and then they came back and they built Beit HaMikdash. So there had to be, there's an inherent, okay, but at what point did the kedusha come to a certain point? So if you remember learning about halachot of Shemitah last year, and sometimes even some of you had asked me, you'd seen on packaging, it said Ole Bavel, Ole Mitzrayim, which we've discussed before. So there were two times where the land of Israel received a boost, so to speak, in the kedusha. One was the Ole Mitzrayim, when the Jews came back from Egypt, meaning from the time of Yehoshua, and they did the wars, and they did Chalukat Haaretz, they divided the land into tribes. That series of 14 years, 7 years of kibush, 7 years of Chalukah, 7 years of conquering, and 7 years of dividing, that infused the land with additional kedusha. Now, I didn't see what I'm about to say, but I'm going to make a comparison. That they built the Beit HaMikdash, and before that the Mishkan, and when it was already had some holiness to it, but until the Shekhinah comes into the Beit HaMikdash, or until the Shekhinah came into the Mishkan, it didn't have the higher level of kedusha. So too over here, the land had an inherent level of kedusha, but it was bumped up to the level it was supposed to be and needed to be when Yehoshua comes into the land and, in a sense, consecrates it. I use that term in quotes. Now he's telling us that it is this moment when Am Yisrael acts with complete unity, when they celebrate the holiday of Sukkot, when it's Vahita Ach Sameach, that there is a transformation once again, because when they left, remember he said this in the beginning of this paragraph, that the level of Kedusha either went away or was diminished, and now it is reinfused. So according to the Dat Sofrim, what is it that had not happened since the time of Yehoshua? Not that they didn't keep Sukkot, Chas v'shalom. Rather, the idea was that it was once a replication of infusing the land of Israel once again with Kedusha. And that's the concept what we call Ole Bavel. The people who came from Bavel, these are the people we're talking about now, who reinfused the land with Kedusha. That's the opinion of the Dat Sofrim. Let's take a look at a couple others. Mitzudat David, where he said this is the Kilo Asu. They did not do this since the days of Yoshua bin Nun. But Salomar means to say, Asu ha-mitzvah min ha-muvchar. They did the mitzvah of Sukkot the best possible way, asher lo asu ken mimei Yoshua bin Nun, that they had not really kept, they'd kept Sukkot, but they didn't make it the best effort, best Sukkot they could have since the time of Yehoshua bin Nun. Uhafuch kamo ki lo asu b'nei Yisrael ken mimei ad hayom hahu. He's saying that he kind of is explaining what the negative is here. What is the negative? What is it they didn't do? That they didn't do what they did back in the time of Yoshua. Since then, they had not kept Sukkot. They all kept it. It's not like they didn't keep it a chag. Of course, it was a chag. But I'm going to make up the following, okay? Because it's obviously not, I have no way of knowing. But what Mitzudat David is saying is something to the effect of, they got by with a few sheets and the minimum size of walls, maybe. And they ate the snack or something just to be yotzei. But now they did it in the fullest possible way. The Ralbag gives us a different story. Ralbag says as follows. By the way, I'm not going to get into it. There is a commentary on Tanakh. The name is Minchat Shai. Minchat Shai will appear, you'll see it in many of the Korot Gedolot Chumashim. There's a standalone book also. It deals with many things where you have like Ketiv and Kri, where it's written one way, you read it a different way, where the letter is missing, there's an extra letter, a quote extra. And here what he does deal with, I'm not dealing with tonight, is you see the name Yehoshua. We know him as Hoshea bin Nun and Yehoshua. Remember Hashem, Moshe adds the letter Yud to the name Yehoshua when just before the Meraglim, the so-called spies go into the land. But here is referred to as Yeshua. Why? Again, that's if you want to take a look, you can follow up with the Minchat Shai. It says, Ki lo asu mimei Yeshua bin Nun, Kain b'nei Yisrael. Ratzalomar means to say, Liot lev kol habayim sham tov im Hashem. V'likro yom b'yom b'sefer Torat Elokim. That his perspective is just a little bit different. It's more focused on the people, not so much the Chag and the Sukkot and everything. And it's not talking about the Kedushat Haaretz. He says that the way the people, their unity, the way they read the Torah every day, evidently was not yet done at this till this point. Maybe they did back in the time of Yoshua. They did read it every day, like they did now, but that seems to have fallen by the wayside. And now they started it again. Or it's possible, says the Ralbag, that may be similar to what we see before, that they had not yet properly made Sukkot over the years, and they were not all unified, their hearts weren't completely into it. Now, what does all this have to do with what's really going on in this chapter? Okay, this chapter has other issues that we're going to have to deal with, okay? There are, an anomaly means something that's like, seems changed, different, like out of order, missing something. There are definitely some anomalies in this chapter. Now, what I'd like to do is, you feel free to take yourselves off of mute if you want to contribute. I'm just going to remind you the topics in this chapter. And I want you, actually, let me back up before I do that. Many years ago, I taught, when I was teaching in Chicago, I taught at one of the places I taught was the Adikam Jewish Academy. And I taught grade 11, a boys class for honors Gemara and a girls class for honors Gemara. And over the years, people would ask me, what's the difference between teaching Gemara to girls and to guys? And I can't say this is true about adults because I've never taught adults yet. I haven't taught adults Gemara, neither women nor men. But every single year, and I taught it for many years, every single year I saw the same thing happen in the girls' class. And what was it? After about one or two, first I gave the background to the boys and to the girls, because no matter what their background was, almost always they didn't know what the Gemara was, even if they've been learning it for a while. That's another pet peeve of mine, that the teacher says, okay, we're learning Mishnah, we're learning Gemara, we're learning Navi. Like, what is it? Why do we learn it? Anyways, so I give the background. And after about 1 or 2 or 3 days, in every single class that I taught with the girls, they would raise their hand and say, why can't they just tell us what to do? Once in a while, the guys would ask that, but almost always the girls. Now I'm talking about adults. I'm talking about girls that were in 11th grade. So you're talking 17 years old approximately. And not almost every single year, some of the girls would ask that question. So people get into their head, male, female, it doesn't make a difference, whether when you're learning Gemara or you're learning it, look at Navi. And you say, like, wait a second, why do they have to even discuss this? Because that's the halacha, right? That's the law. Well, the Gemara is the evolution of halacha. Over the centuries, there are things that were dealt with in the Gemara that over the time periods that come after them, and when the Rambam codifies for the first time, really, Jewish law, the first of the code of Jewish law was the Rambam. When he puts it into the 14 sections known as the Yad HaChazakah, he had to base his psak, his halachic decisions, on a majority rules based on 2 out of 3 decisors of halacha. He would say they agree with that, then that's what the halacha is. During the times before that of the Gaonim, when there were back and forth letters between the diaspora and Israel, whether also within the diaspora, there was during this time period, from let's say approximately the year 500 until approximately the year 1450, during those few hundred years, there was this entire maturing and growth and evolution of halacha. Doesn't stop, because today we deal with, when electricity was first invented, they had to deal with it in halacha. The computers were invented, when driving was invented, when airplanes were invented, all these different new things, somehow it had to be dealt with within the area of halacha. So it's always expanding, growing. And so if, for example, if there's the question that Gemara brings up and says, someone should be allowed to do X on Shabbat, and your first inclination be like, how in the world can they do that? That's muksa. They can't do that on Shabbat. Muksa, meaning they can't move that object. Of course it's muksa. We know that it's muksa. Well, I hate to break the news to you, There's the famous machloket in the Gemara. It's one of the few that I know the names of the two people that disagree. I think it's Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. Whether there's a din of muksa altogether. Do we have muksa? They're not muksa. What do you mean? Of course there's muksa. Well, dude, when you go back 1,000 years, almost 2,000 years to the time of the Mishnah, where that was still in process and it was still growing, we moved from the law that revolved around the Beit HaMikdash to what became known then as Rabbinic Judaism after destruction of Beit HaMikdash. And this is the time period where now it's going to play a role in this year I came across. I'm going to share with you. So why am I mentioning all this? Because when you look at this chapter, you think like, wait a minute. Now I want you to use your modern day brain and tell me what's missing here. Okay. We talked about Rosh Hashanah. We talked about Sukkot. We talked about materials that were suggested to be taken. What's missing here in this chapter? If this is really a discussion about the way they kept the holidays, what's going on? What's missing? Anybody? You can take yourself off mute, Aryeh. Try it. Come on.
Am I on?
You're on.
Okay. Two things I see. Arba Minim and Yom Kippur.
Ah, excellent. So 2 out of 3 you caught. One, the Arba Minim. What do you mean by the Arba Minim? Explain to me what you're saying. You're right, but what do you say?
As I understand, there is a mitzvah, d'oraita, to take the 4 Arba Minim.
Right.
On the day of Sukkot.
Right. So what's missing here? You're right.
Did I miss it? Did I sleep through it? Or is it?
No, you're right. Because if you look back at Pasuk Tet Vav, which is why I reread it tonight, you'll see they take certain things. Ale Zayit, that's not one of the Arba Minim. Eight Shem is not. Hadas, yes. Ale Tzmarim is not. Ale Tzavot is. Wait a minute, what's missing? How about an etrog? Right? How about a lulav? Well, they do, because if you talk about the branch of the date, that's a lulav. I mean, the palm's missing. No, that's missing also. So the missing things on the Arba Minim. Excellent. What else? You said Yom Kippur. Right. We went from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. What about to Sukkot? What happened to Yom Kippur? Comes right in the middle. There's one more thing that's what's also missing here.
Tekiyat Shofar.
Right. There's no shofar. There's no. Very good. Excellent.
My wife is not listening to your shir.
He's allowed to listen. Yat shofar is missing. Any of our rituals. What about? Hello, they just built the Beit HaMikdash, right? Korbanot. No korbanot to mention. They talk about reading the Torah, but when we read the Torah during the week of Sukkot, what is it we're reading about? The Shivim Parei HaChag, the 70 bull offerings that were made during the week of Sukkot. There's no mention of korbanot here at all. So it seems to be things that are missing in here, apparently. So if they are missing, what does that tell us? So we're going to go back to, I'm going to read this or read from some notes that I found in this year. But what is it what do you think? Why would these things be missing? Oh, Aryeh asked me a question. Who says we cannot walk on Har HaBayit?
You said you get Har HaBayit.
Har HaBayit in certain areas, yes, of course, you may.
Oh, okay.
Right. Yeah, but you can't go where the Beit HaMikdash stood. Right?
Okay.
Okay. But you're right. You can walk on Har HaBayit, according to many opinions. And we know that there's a big machloket about who says what, but I'm too little to put my head in between those two mountains, as they say. For the record, I've been up. So what would you think would be the reason to leave out some of these things? And I'll give you one point is I wasn't steering you the other way by saying, oh, because it's still the evolution of halacha. No, that's not why.
Could it be that with a choser b'tshuva, you don't overdo it?
Okay, so the answer is yes, with choser b'tshuva, you don't overdo it. But let's just say for a second, how does that work out by not blowing the shofar? I mean, that would seem to be like a major thing missing from Rosh Hashanah. But let me add to the question. What's this whole business about them wanting to cry and they're being told, don't cry? Does that have something to do with Rosh Hashanah's mahut, its essence, having changed over time? Okay, so with all these questions, I printed out this shear that I came across. That was very well done. And I kind of highlighted things I want to say from it and cherry picked items from it. I'm going to try to answer some of these things. So he starts off, this is from Rav Tzvi Sinensky from Yeshivat Har Etzion, from Gush. And he starts out with the topic of the questions I basically posed already. That's pretty strange that you don't mention Tkiyat Shofar. There's no mention of Yom Kippur. And even the mentioning of the way we kept Sukkot, there's no real mention of the Arba Minim, the 4 species, Lulav, Hadas, the Etrog, and the Aravot. There's like a part of them are mentioned, and also this whole business of the Jews' desire to fast and to cry and to be somber on Rosh Hashanah. In addition to that, there's one more pasuk I purposely skipped. We'll go back to it now. If you take a look, let me take where it is. Go back to pasuk Yud for a moment, number 10. Let me read it to you. Vayomer lahem, and I think someone mentioned this last week. Vayomer lahem, and Ezra said to them, instead of fasting and instead of being somber, instead of crying, go home and eat fatted foods. Ushtu mamtakim, and drink good drinks. V'shilchu manot le'in nachon. Sounds like Mishloach Manot. Sounds like he's borrowing something from the book of Megillat Esther. What's this business of what sounds like Mishloach Manot on Rosh Hashanah? So there really is, the general answer is, there really is no question here at all. Because the fact that we left out some of the practices of Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot, specifically blowing the shofar, and the Arbat Minim listed as is because this chapter is not about telling us how they kept the Chag. It's not about focusing on the practices of the holiday, but on the unique way in which it was observed specifically at this moment in history. What was different, what the focus was. Does not mean that, God forbid, they didn't blow the shofar. But it's the fact that something's missing is because it's to be able to highlight something else. Let's say, for example, it's not a good example, it's what comes to my head. You had a very busy day, and there were some really important things that happened, and some not so important, but they're important things. And someone sits down and says, look, you seem to have had a very busy day. I'm sure you want to unburden yourself. Tell me about your day. And you have like 4 or 5 things. And they're all pretty important, but you focus on a couple of them. Does that mean the others were not important? No, but there was a reason for you to highlight those. And for various reasons, our parak is not highlighting how they kept the mitzvot across the board of all the halachot, but for very specific parts. And we're going to see why. The emphasis on Rosh Hashanah celebration regarding the question of fasting versus celebration is there to help us to focus more on the idea of the mitzvah, the reinvigoration, maybe the renewal of this mitzvah of Sukkot, because everyone seems to say, all the different opinions that we read through seem to indicate that part of the newness here was the way they approached this mitzvah for the first time in many, many years. The emphasis here also on our parak is not the Beit HaMikdash, which is surprising that they finished the Beit HaMikdash, and it's not the Beit HaMikdash. Before I even continue, I want someone to take a guess. Why do you think that they would not focus on Beit HaMikdash? Because, korbanot, right? Why not? And guess. Don't be afraid to be wrong. Doesn't mean I'm right or he's right. This is the idea or opinion. Even though we had a Beit HaMikdash, we still had a level of some modicum of galut. We still had many Jews living in Chutz La'aretz in Bavel and other areas. And as I mentioned to you before, we had started at this time period of history to move more towards rabbinic Judaism than Beit HaMikdash-based Judaism. And therefore, it's telling us that even though, and this is because of experience, we know we lost our first Beit HaMikdash. There was no guarantee about the second one. We were hoping that it would stay. But even though we may not one day have a Beit HaMikdash, we still had to know how to do what was important, so that we could still continue Judaism without the Beit HaMikdash. Is it b'diavad? Is it like second? Is it second best? Is it subet? Of course it is. Of course it's second best. It's not the best. The best is the Beit HaMikdash. We need that to be complete Jews. We need that to be completely to serve Hashem the right way. But so therefore the korbanot are not included because even though they could have done them and probably did do them then, it was a message about the future as well. Many of the practices, I said, were left out of this parak, including shofar. Why was that left out? Because that's also connected to Beit HaMikdash. How is that connected to Beit HaMikdash? And not because they didn't blow shofarot, they blew chatzotzrot, they blew trumpets by the korbanot. Why is shofar connected to Beit HaMikdash? Because only the Beit HaMikdash, although that's starting to change today, they blow shofar on Shabbat. Only the Beit HaMikdash, they're allowed to blow shofar on Shabbat. In addition to that, how are the Arba Minim connected to Beit HaMikdash? Same thing. And I'm going to give you a little history lesson in a minute. In the Beit HaMikdash, when Shabbat occurred during Sukkot, in the Beit HaMikdash area, they would take the Arba Minim. We know that we don't. And matter of fact, they only took it the time the Beit HaMikdash won the first day. And if it was Shabbat, then that was it. They didn't take they may not have even had the opportunity. Again, I'm not getting into details now, but the only place at that time was in the Beit HaMikdash area was where they would take the lulav, hadath, etc., all the Arba Minim on Shabbat. Now let's just put a parentheses here for a minute. When the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, when the second Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, we know, this is something when we finished the book of Nehemiah, I may segue into this altogether, Jewish history. We know that there was a man, he's one of my heroes of Jewish history, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he instituted something, many things. Hold on one second. Something just popped into my head. I want to check something. I want to make sure I have the right quote. Let me just read this here. Tainly, it's not Tnubi. I knew that didn't sound right. Hold on one second. Okay. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, after the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, goes to Vespasianus, and he says, Tainli Yavne v'chachameh. What he wants to do is he wants to transplant the center of Judaism temporarily from Yerushalayim to Yavne. Why? And what does he do among those things? There's a lot of things that he does that are called Zeichel HaMikdash. He institutes many things that we do to this day as a remembrance of Beit HaMikdash. And one of them is that we take the lulav every single day except Shabbat. Beit HaMikdash, they took it every single day. Outside Beit HaMikdash, only on the first day. So if you lived in the time of Beit HaMikdash, and it was the third day of Chol HaMoed, you wouldn't take the Arba Minim unless you were by the Beit HaMikdash. Why do we do it all 7 days? Because Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted that as a Zeichel HaMikdash. Many things that we do to this day, and we're going to get to that down the road, Bezrat Hashem, is a Zeichel HaMikdash. So it leaves out the Arba Minim, it leaves out Shofar, because even just like Korbanot, they did have a direct tie to the Beit HaMikdash. So what about the mourning versus celebrating? So some people suggest that the desire to mourn and to be sad and to cry was that there was a tradition, supposedly, that earlier in history, before this time period, Rosh Hashanah was looked at as a very somber day, almost a day of mourning. Why? Because on the first Beit HaMikdash time, because Gedaliah ben Achikam was murdered. And there is an opinion that he was murdered actually on Rosh Hashanah. Remember, he was the last governor of the Commonwealth, Jewish Commonwealth. This is the first Beit HaMikdash. But that's probably not the reason why that they were wanting to cry. A more logical reason seems to be that it's this spontaneous, like, aha moment that they were not keeping Torah properly. They are not living as proper Torah Jews. And now that the Torah has been read to them and what they have to do, they start like, oh my gosh, all these things we've done terribly. And they want to do tshuva. And part of that is a feeling of the need to fast and to feel to tear their clothes and to feel sad. And then as to counter that, Ezra says, no, do exactly the opposite. Today's not a day to fast. Today's go home to be happy, to enjoy. And if you look in Pasuk Yud Bet, number 12, what does it say? Look at Pasuk Yud Bet. It says, which we haven't dealt with yet, the Mishlach Manot. They went to make a great simcha. Why? Because now they understood. What is it that they understood? They had a new insight, a new look and perspective of what Torah was trying to tell them. So therefore, the original, according to most opinions, Sudat David and Malbim and others, that their excitement was the fact that they rediscovered Torah. Their original reason to want to be sad and to fast and to be almost like a mournful day was that they realized what they were doing wrong. Again, we call this chapter the beginning of the Tshuva revolution. But now they're renewing their commitment to Torah. It also strengthens the Pasuk in Tehillim, Pikudei Hashem Yisharim B'samchei Lev. Why is it that an Avel is not allowed to learn Torah? Because that we know that Torah brings joy. Now, like I said before, this narrative, in this parak, also gives us an additional basis for many of the things that become halacha. When the Shulchan Aruch is written, and before that, the Rambam writes his code of law, when we move this, I say, to rabbinic Judaism. But I want to deal with this for a moment, this question of Mishloach Manot. It could have used different phrases, used different words. It could have said matanot, it could have said all kinds of things. But it uses an expression almost identical to the one that's found in the book of Esther. Interestingly enough, there are some who make the following comment, which is going to sound shocking. So before I tell you this, let me tell you something else. Let's talk about Thanksgiving, the American holiday of Thanksgiving. So over the years, you will find, for those who were born and raised in the United States, myself included, we, quote, celebrated Thanksgiving. What do we do for Thanksgiving? We would get together to have a meal together as a family. Of course, you have people say, it's like the Goyim. How can you do that? So along comes Moshe Feinstein, Tzaddik V'Kadosh Livracha, who wrote a tshuva, I think it was in the 60s, saying that it was perfectly okay as long as you said it Dvar Torah and Hoda'ah Hashem. Even though the Goyim do it, what they're doing is saying thank you to Hashem, and therefore we could do something like they're doing. It's not Chukot HaGoyim. It is also said that the Rav Yosef Tov Alevi Salvation Zatzal, who was keeping his shiur in YU, would leave his shiur, finish early in order to get back to Brookline, if I'm not mistaking the direction he went, for a Thanksgiving meal with his own family as well. And how families, quote unquote, celebrated Thanksgiving over the years is immaterial to the discussion, whether they did or didn't. But where did it come from? We know as believing Jews that every day is Thanksgiving for us. We say it 3 times a day minimum in Modim and Nachum. We say it throughout Tefillah. There's Hoda'ah and Tefillah as well. So there are some scholars that say that it was a custom in the Persian world. Remember, this is where they come from. They were in Babylonia, which was conquered by the Persians. So now they have a Persian background for the last many years, that on their new year, they would distribute food gifts to families. So therefore, just because the non-Jewish world did it, didn't make it usher to do, didn't disqualify the behavior, but it was something that the Jews were aware of. And remember, this is Rosh Hashanah time, or Rosh Hashanah, and they felt, Ezra said, he wanted to do something similar. Now, that's one possibility. A more likely possibility, if we go back, remember just another a chapter ago, we were talking in depth, or 2 chapters, that what was one of the goals of Nehemiah? It was a social justice program. The haves and the have-nots being brought more into par. And therefore, one of the purposes of that was also to engender a connection for all people with each other through food. There's another possibility, and that has to do, I'm just going to read to you what he says here. Although the language of Nehemiah clearly borrows from that of Purim and Megillat Esther, the larger motif is drawn directly from Chumash. The Torah commands us, you shall rejoice in your festival, your son and daughter, your male and female slave, the Levi, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow of your communities. While cast in contemporary language and consistent with contemporary Gentile practice, Nehemiah's charge is deeply rooted in the Torah's vision of the proper celebration of a holiday. He's telling us that the idea of mingling with people, bringing joy to people, imagine you just get together on a chag and just sit and talk, right? You don't eat together. The difference between this situation, just sitting and talking or having a meal together or sending food packages, how is it like on Purim, right? By the way, just another parenthetical statement. Someone commented to me many years ago, and I think it's truly, truly correct. Maybe it was one of you, I don't remember. That we all tend to give mishloach manot to the people we like or that we deal with. But people that we may have issues with in life, we don't necessarily reach out and give mishloach manot. And I took a lesson from that, to be honest with you, a couple of years ago. There was a person within the community that he and I didn't see eye to eye about something, and sent mishloach manot, dafa. And I think that just, as we come closer, we're only a little bit, I hate to tell you, we're only a few weeks away from Purim, that it's something to keep in mind. Now, going back to here, the idea here was that Ezra was trying to engender this joy of spirit of brotherhood and everything else, but to live up to what it says according to this, to what it says in the Torah, to spread the joy, to make it a joyous life. It has to be the Levi'im and the Kohanim and the Israelim and the children, the widows, and everybody. But what about the fact that the Aravot are not mentioned, the Aravot are not mentioned, the Etrog is not mentioned, only a couple of the species are mentioned. There are different opinions here, what's going on. And there is a comment from the Ibn Ezra, says as follows. And you can look if you want. I was going to make a slide of it. I figured I'd just read the English for you. In Pasuk Tet Vav, Ibn Ezra says that he is the reason that they were mentioning all these different species is not a get this and get this and get this and get this, but rather, says the Ibn Ezra and others, it was either get this or get this or get this and use them to build your Sukkot. We were not talking, they could use it for schach, you could use them for the walls. It had nothing directly to do with the Arba Minim. It just so happened that some of the things they were mentioning along the way were also part of the Arba Minim, but were not necessarily about using for the Arba Minim, but rather for materials, building materials for their Sukkot. Okay, just a little word of the next chapter, because the next 2 chapters really go together. It's a very long, relatively long chapter. At least a third of the chapter, from davening in Shacharit every day, which we'll see. And it becomes the continuation of the Tshuva revolution and leading in chapter 10 to basically signing a contract, in quotes, with God, between the Jewish people and God. Now, it's nice that they had this awakening and they had the Torah read to them, and now they're finding more about the Chag, and they kept Sukkot like an unbelievable way. But what's the biggest challenge when you finish Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot? What's the biggest challenge? We have nothing in Mar Cheshvan, no official holiday. You have in Kislev, we know we have Hanukkah. The biggest challenge after the Chagim, is keeping that momentum going. You did your tshuva, you fasted in Kippur, came out snow white, you built your sukkah, Motzei Yom Kippur, and then you put the sukkah away, it's raining, and it's cold. Now what? Now comes the true test. So in a sense, the same thing happens in the next chapter. The Chag is over, it's behind them. Now what? What are they going to do? So that's what chapter 9 and pretty much chapter 10 will be about also. Bezrat Hashem next. Have a good evening and a Shavua Tov.